My name is Sarah Wilson, and 6 months ago my husband left me for my pregnant sister. What he didn't know was that the baby wasn't his, and my sister was lying to steal the $8 million inheritance I'd been hiding from both of them. But the real shock came when I discovered why she really needed that money so desperately. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about the most calculated family betrayal you have ever heard, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about marriage, family loyalty, and what happens when greed destroys everything people claim to value. For 2 years, I had been keeping 3 life-changing secrets from my family. First, that I had inherited $8.2 million from my great-aunt Eleanor when she died in a nursing home in Michigan. Second, that my marriage to David was falling apart because of his gambling addiction and financial lies. Third, that my sister Jessica was not the perfect suburban mother she pretended to be, but was involved in something that would shock everyone who knew her. My story begins 4 years ago when I was 32 years old, working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized advertising agency in Denver, married to David Wilson for 6 years. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in Aurora, drove reliable but not expensive cars, and appeared to be a typical middle-class couple working towards standard American dreams like homeownership, financial security, and eventually starting a family. But appearances were deceiving in ways I was only beginning to understand. David worked as a claims adjuster for an insurance company, a job that required him to investigate accident scenes, interview witnesses, and determine liability for property damage and personal injury cases. It was steady work that paid reasonably well, though David constantly complained that his salary was not enough to support the lifestyle he believed we deserved. What I did not know during our early years together was that David had developed a serious gambling problem that was systematically destroying our financial security. He had started with small bets on football games and basketball tournaments, using online gambling sites that made it easy to place wagers with money we could not afford to lose. Over time, David's gambling escalated to poker games in private homes, casino trips he claimed were work-related social events, and eventually sports betting that consumed most of his paycheck before I ever saw any of the money. David had become extremely skilled at hiding his addiction, creating elaborate stories about work expenses, car repairs, and other necessities that explained why our joint checking account was always lower than our combined salaries suggested it should. My sister Jessica lived in Lakewood with her husband Mark and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. Jessica was 35 years old, 3 years older than me, and had always been the family favorite. She was prettier, more outgoing, and seemed to have naturally achieved everything that required effort for everyone else. Jessica had married Mark straight out of college, bought a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, and created what appeared to be a perfect suburban lifestyle. Mark owned a successful plumbing business that generated substantial income, allowing Jessica to work part-time as a dental hygienist while maintaining her role as a devoted mother and community volunteer. Their marriage appeared to be everything mine was not: stable, prosperous, and filled with the kind of domestic happiness that made other people envious. But Jessica had secrets too. Secrets that would eventually destroy multiple families and reveal a side of her character that none of us had ever suspected. For the past 3 years, Jessica had been embezzling money from the dental practice where she worked, skimming cash payments and manipulating insurance billing to steal approximately $40,000 that she used to fund a gambling addiction that rivaled David's in its destructiveness. Jessica's gambling problem was different from David's, but equally devastating to her family's financial security. While David preferred sports betting and poker, Jessica was addicted to online slot machines and casino gambling that she could access from her phone during work hours and family time. She had accumulated enormous credit card debt, taken multiple cash advances, and was facing the possibility of criminal charges if her embezzlement was discovered by her employer. The third member of our family triangle was my mother, Linda Patterson, who lived alone in a small apartment in Westminster after my father's death from cancer 5 years earlier. Mom worked as a receptionist at a medical clinic and lived on a combination of her modest salary, Dad's life insurance money, and Social Security benefits that provided basic financial security but very little extra for emergencies or luxuries. What none of us knew was that our great-aunt Eleanor, my grandmother's sister, had been quietly accumulating wealth for decades while living in a modest assisted living facility in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Aunt Eleanor had never married, had no children, and had spent her career as a high school mathematics teacher while making remarkably successful investments in stocks and real estate. When Aunt Eleanor died at age 91, her will revealed that she had been worth over $12 million, accumulated through 6 decades of careful investing and frugal living. The bulk of her estate was divided among various charities and educational institutions, but she had left specific bequests to family members she felt demonstrated responsibility and good character. I received $8.2 million, the largest individual inheritance, with a letter explaining that Aunt Eleanor had been watching our family for years and believed I was the person most likely to use wealth responsibly and maintain the values she considered important. Jessica received $500,000, a substantial amount but significantly less than mine. Mom received $200,000 and Dad's life insurance, had already provided for her basic needs. The letter Aunt Eleanor left for me was both a gift and a warning about the impact sudden wealth could have on family relationships. She advised me to keep the inheritance secret until I had time to understand how money would change the way people treated me, and to be especially careful about family members who might see my good fortune as their opportunity to solve their own financial problems. Followed Aunt Eleanor's advice and told no one about the inheritance, not David, not Jessica, not even Mom. I worked with a financial advisor to invest the money conservatively while I continued my regular job and maintained our previous lifestyle. The only change was that I stopped worrying about our financial future and began paying more attention to David's behavior patterns that I had previously overlooked or explained away. Having financial security gave me the confidence to examine my marriage more critically. And what I discovered was deeply troubling. David was not just hiding gambling losses. He was systematically lying about almost every aspect of our finances. He had opened credit cards in my name without my knowledge, borrowed money from his family while claiming the loans were for me, and even forged my signature on documents related to our car loans and insurance policies. Over the 6 months following my inheritance, I hired a private investigator to document David's gambling activities and financial deception. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. David had stolen over $60,000 from our joint accounts, taken cash advances on multiple credit cards, and was approximately $120,000 in debt to various casinos, online gambling sites, and private lenders. Even more shocking was the discovery that David had been in contact with my sister Jessica about their mutual gambling problems. They had been meeting regularly for coffee, supposedly to discuss family matters, but actually to share strategies for hiding their addictions and accessing money to fund their continued gambling. During one of these meetings, which the private investigator recorded with long-range audio equipment, David and Jessica discussed their frustration with their spouse's financial conservatism and their shared belief that they deserved access to more money than their families were providing. Jessica mentioned that she was certain I was hiding assets because our lifestyle seemed too comfortable for someone working in marketing at a small agency. David agreed that I was probably concealing money, possibly inheritance or investment income that I was keeping secret to avoid sharing with him. They made plans to investigate my financial accounts and credit reports to determine how much I might be hiding and whether there were legal ways to access money they believed belonged to the family rather than just to me. But then something happened that changed the entire dynamic of our family relationships and set in motion the betrayal that would eventually destroy both my marriage and my relationship with Jessica forever. Jessica discovered she was pregnant, and instead of telling Mark, she decided to use the pregnancy as a weapon to destroy my marriage and gain access to whatever money she suspected I was hiding. Jessica's plan was both brilliant and devastating in its simplicity. She would convince David that he was the father of her baby, use their supposed affair to break up my marriage, and then marry David to gain legal access to assets she assumed we owned jointly. Once she was David's wife, Jessica believed she would be able to force me to share whatever money I was concealing, either through family pressure or legal action. The first step in Jessica's plan was seducing David, which proved easier than she had expected. David's gambling addiction had left him desperate for money and increasingly resentful of what he perceived as my financial selfishness. When Jessica suggested that they could solve both of their problems by working together, David was receptive to her proposal. Jessica told David that she had always been attracted to him and that her marriage to Mark had become boring and restrictive. She claimed that Mark was controlling about money and that she felt trapped in a suburban lifestyle that prevented her from pursuing her real dreams. David, whose own marriage was deteriorating due to his lies and gambling, was flattered by Jessica's attention and easily convinced that he deserved a relationship with someone who appreciated his ambitions. Their affair began 3 months after Jessica's discovery of her pregnancy, though she let David believe he had been the one to initiate their relationship. Jessica was careful to establish a timeline that would make David think he could be the father of her baby, while actually ensuring that the conception date corresponded with her last intimate encounter with Mark before she began avoiding him sexually. Jessica documented their affair meticulously, saving text messages, emails, and even recording some of their conversations to create evidence that would support her claim about the baby's paternity. She also began gathering information about my financial accounts, using David's access to our home computer and mail to research my banking and investment records. What Jessica and David discovered when they investigated my finances was beyond their wildest expectations. Instead of finding evidence of modest savings or a small inheritance, they uncovered documentation of the $8.2 million trust account that managed my inheritance from Aunt Eleanor. The discovery of my wealth was the catalyst that transformed Jessica's pregnancy, scheme from a plan to escape her current problems into an elaborate conspiracy to steal millions of dollars. Jessica convinced David that I had been deceiving him about our financial situation for years and that he had legal rights to half of whatever I owned as my husband, David's. Reaction to learning about my inheritance was not gratitude or excitement about our improved financial prospects. Instead, he was furious that I had kept such important information secret, and he began demanding access to the money to pay off his gambling debts and fund investments he claimed would multiply our wealth exponentially. When I refused to discuss my inheritance or give David access to accounts that were legally mine alone, he became increasingly aggressive and manipulative. David accused me of being selfish and deceptive, claiming that good wives shared everything with their husbands and that my secretiveness proved I did not trust him or value our marriage. Jessica encouraged David's resentment and helped him develop strategies for gaining access to my money. She suggested that David could threaten divorce unless I agreed to share the inheritance, or that he could claim half of my assets were community property acquired during our marriage. Jessica also proposed that David could argue I had used marital funds to invest or maintain the inheritance, giving him legal standing to claim partial ownership. But Jessica's most devastating suggestion was that David should leave me for her, using their affair and her pregnancy as leverage to force me to provide financial support for their new family. Jessica calculated that I would be so devastated by David's betrayal, and so concerned about the baby she claimed was his, that I would agree to generous support payments to avoid the public humiliation of a contested divorce. Jessica's plan reached its climax 6 months ago when she and David decided to reveal their affair and demand that I provide financial support for their relationship. They chose to make their announcement during Mom's birthday dinner, calculating that the public setting would prevent me from reacting too emotionally and that family pressure would encourage me to be reasonable about their financial needs. The dinner was held at Mom's favorite restaurant, a modest Italian place in Westminster, where our family had celebrated important occasions for years. Mom, Jessica, Mark, Emma, David, and I gathered around a large table, sharing appetizers and making small talk about work, school, and weekend plans. Everything seemed normal until Jessica announced that she had important news to share with the family. "I am pregnant," Jessica said with a glowing smile, "and the baby's father is sitting right here at this table." Mom immediately congratulated Mark and began asking excited questions about due dates and baby preparations. But Jessica's next words changed everything and revealed the depth of her betrayal. "Actually, Mom, the father is not Mark," Jessica said calmly, looking directly at me. "David and I have been having an affair for months, and we are in love. We want to be together, and we are planning to raise this baby as a family." The silence at the table was deafening. Mom's face went white. Mark looked like he had been physically struck, and Emma began crying without understanding why the adults around her had suddenly become so upset. David reached over and took Jessica's hand, confirming that her announcement was not a cruel joke or misunderstanding. "I know this is shocking," David said, looking at me with what appeared to be genuine remorse. "But Jessica and I have found something special together, and we cannot continue pretending that our marriages are working. Sarah, I care about you, but I am not in love with you anymore. I want to be with Jessica and help raise our child." As I sat there absorbing the magnitude of their betrayal, I felt something unexpected. Instead of devastation or heartbreak, I felt relief. Relief that David's lies and manipulation were finally in the open. Relief that Jessica's true character was being revealed to our entire family. And relief that I had the financial resources to handle whatever challenges lay ahead without depending on either of them for support. But I also felt something else. Curiosity about what Jessica and David really wanted from this public confession, and suspicion that their announcement was designed to manipulate me into some kind of financial arrangement that would benefit both of them. I decided to let them reveal their full plan before responding to their betrayal. "Sarah," Jessica said, reaching across the table to touch my hand, "I know this hurts, but David and I need you to understand that we never meant for this to happen. We tried to fight our feelings, but we cannot deny what we have found together. We are hoping that you will support our decision and help us create a healthy environment for this baby." David nodded in agreement. "We know this is difficult for you, Sarah, but we are hoping we can handle this situation maturely, like adults who care about each other's happiness. Jessica and I will need some financial support while we establish our new household, and we are hoping you will be generous about helping us get started." There it was. The real purpose of their public confession was not to seek forgiveness or explain their feelings, but to pressure me into providing money for their new life together. They had orchestrated this entire scene to manipulate me into funding their betrayal, calculating that family pressure and concern for the baby would make me compliant with their demands. I looked around the table at my family members, all of whom were staring at me expectantly, waiting for my response to this devastating announcement. Mom looked confused and hurt, not understanding how her daughters could have created such a painful situation. Mark looked angry and humiliated, realizing that his wife had been deceiving him for months. Emma continued crying, sensing that her family was falling apart, but not comprehending the adult complications that were destroying her security. When I finally spoke, my voice was calmer than I had expected it would be. "David," I said, "I want you to pack your belongings and leave our house tonight. You can stay wherever you have been staying during your affair with Jessica. We will communicate through lawyers from now on." I turned to Jessica. "And you," I continued, "have made your choice. You chose to betray your husband, destroy your daughter's family, and lie to our mother on her birthday. You will have to live with the consequences of those decisions without any help from me." But David and Jessica were not finished with their manipulation. David became agitated when he realized I was not going to cooperate with their financial demands. "Sarah, you cannot just throw away 6 years of marriage because you are upset about Jessica and me," he said. "We need to discuss this reasonably, like mature adults who have shared responsibilities." Jessica also tried to escalate the pressure. "Sarah, this baby is your niece or nephew," she said. "Are you really going to abandon your own family because your feelings are hurt? Mom, tell Sarah she cannot just walk away from all of us because she is angry." But I had heard enough of their manipulation and emotional blackmail. I stood up from the table, placed $40 beside my plate to cover my portion of the dinner bill, and prepared to leave the restaurant. Before I walked away, I decided to give them one piece of information that would change everything about their plans and expectations. "Jessica," I said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear clearly, "I know the baby is not David's. I know you have been embezzling money from the dental practice where you work. I know about both of your gambling addictions, and I know exactly why you want access to my inheritance from Aunt Eleanor." The expressions on their faces were priceless. David looked confused and alarmed, realizing that I knew far more about their situation than they had expected. Jessica looked terrified, understanding that her carefully constructed deception was falling apart. Mom looked shocked by the revelation about the inheritance, and Mark looked relieved to learn that Jessica's baby was actually his. But I was not finished delivering surprises. "David," I continued, "I have been documenting your gambling addiction and theft for months. You have stolen over $60,000 from our joint accounts, and I have evidence of every transaction. You will be lucky if I do not press criminal charges against you. And Jessica," I said, turning to face my sister directly, "your employer is going to receive an anonymous tip about your embezzlement activities on Monday morning. You should probably contact a criminal defense attorney before then." I left the restaurant without looking back, knowing that the next few weeks would bring chaos and recriminations as the truth about David and Jessica's deceptions became public knowledge. But I also knew that I had the financial resources and legal protection to handle whatever challenges lay ahead, while they would be facing criminal investigations, divorce proceedings, and the collapse of their carefully constructed lies. The next morning, David returned to our house to collect his belongings, and I was ready for him with a comprehensive packet of evidence documenting his gambling addiction, theft, and affair with Jessica. I also presented him with divorce papers that had been prepared months earlier, when I first discovered the extent of his financial deceptions. David's reaction to seeing the evidence against him was a mixture of anger, fear, and desperate bargaining. He claimed that his gambling was a medical condition that deserved treatment rather than punishment, and that his affair with Jessica was the result of emotional problems caused by stress about our finances. David also tried to claim that my inheritance money was community property that he had legal rights to access, and that I owed him half of whatever I had received from Aunt Eleanor. When I explained that inheritance received by one spouse during marriage was separate property under Colorado law, David became even more agitated and threatening. "You cannot just kick me out and keep all the money for yourself," David said angrily. "I have been supporting you for 6 years, and I deserve compensation for my contributions to our household. I will fight you in court, and I will make sure everyone knows how selfish and vindictive you really are." But David's threats were empty because he had no legal standing to claim any portion of my inheritance, and his own criminal behavior made it impossible for him to attract sympathy from judges or lawyers. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive, with David receiving nothing except the car he drove and his personal belongings. Jessica's situation was even worse than David's. The anonymous tip about her embezzlement led to a criminal investigation that revealed the full extent of her theft from the dental practice. Jessica was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft related to insurance billing irregularities. The criminal charges against Jessica created additional problems for her relationship with David, since his own legal troubles made him an unsuitable partner for someone facing serious criminal prosecution. David's gambling debts also made him a financial liability rather than an asset, eliminating any benefit Jessica might have gained from their relationship. But the most devastating blow to Jessica's deception came when DNA testing revealed that her baby was definitely Mark's child, not David's as she had claimed. The timeline of conception made it impossible for David to be the father, proving that Jessica's entire pregnancy story had been an elaborate lie, designed to manipulate both men and gain access to my inheritance, money. Mark's reaction to learning that the baby was his was complicated by his anger about Jessica's affair and lies. While he was relieved that his marriage could potentially be saved, he was also humiliated by Jessica's public betrayal and uncertain about whether he could trust her enough to continue their relationship. Mark ultimately decided to file for divorce and seek full custody of both Emma and the new baby, arguing that Jessica's criminal behavior and gambling addiction made her an unfit mother. The custody proceedings revealed additional information about Jessica's financial deceptions, including credit cards she had opened in Mark's name and loans she had taken against their house without his knowledge. Jessica was sentenced to 18 months in minimum security prison for embezzlement and fraud. She lost custody of both children and was required to pay restitution to the dental practice where she had stolen money. Her gambling addiction and criminal record made it impossible for her to find employment in healthcare, forcing her to start over in minimum wage jobs when she was eventually released. David's gambling debts caught up with him shortly after our divorce was finalized. His creditors began aggressive collection efforts that resulted in wage garnishment, asset seizure, and eventually bankruptcy proceedings that destroyed his credit rating and professional reputation. David was forced to move back in with his parents and find work in entry-level positions that barely covered his basic living expenses. But the most satisfying aspect of their downfall was watching David and Jessica blame each other for their mutual destruction. David claimed that Jessica had seduced him and lied about the baby's paternity to manipulate him into leaving me. Jessica claimed that David had pressured her into the affair and promised her access to my inheritance money that he had no legal right to provide. Their relationship collapsed within weeks of my divorce from David, as they both realized that neither of them had the resources or stability to support the lifestyle they had planned together. Jessica's pregnancy became a liability rather than an asset, since David had no legal obligation to support a child that was not his biological offspring. 6 months after the restaurant confrontation, I received a letter from Jessica asking for financial help with legal fees and child support payments. She claimed that her criminal conviction was the result of a misunderstanding and that she deserved family support during her legal difficulties. Jessica also suggested that I owed her assistance because my refusal to share my inheritance had forced her into desperate financial decisions. I did not respond to Jessica's letter, but I did send a brief message to Mark offering to establish a college fund for Emma and the new baby. Mark was grateful for the gesture and agreed to accept financial help that would benefit the children without providing any support for Jessica's legal or personal problems. 1 year after David left me for Jessica, my life had changed in ways I could never have anticipated. I had used part of my inheritance to purchase a larger house in a better neighborhood, invested in a small business that provided steady income, and begun volunteering with organizations that helped people recover from gambling addiction and financial abuse. The volunteer work was particularly rewarding because it connected me with other people who had experienced similar betrayals and manipulations. Many of the people I worked with had been deceived by family members or spouses who had hidden gambling addictions, stolen money, or used emotional manipulation to access assets they were not entitled to claim. My experience with David and Jessica had taught me that financial security was meaningless without the wisdom to protect yourself from people who would exploit your generosity or trust. I learned to recognize the warning signs of gambling addiction, financial manipulation, and the kind of entitlement that makes people believe they deserve access to other people's money. 2 years after my divorce, I began dating again, something I had not thought would be possible during the difficult period when David was stealing from our accounts and lying about his gambling. I met Robert Chen, a financial planner who had helped other clients recover from similar situations involving family betrayal and financial abuse. Robert understood the importance of financial independence and personal boundaries in relationships. He had his own resources and career goals that did not depend on access to my inheritance money, and he consistently demonstrated through his actions that healthy partnerships were built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Most importantly, Robert encouraged my charitable work and personal growth rather than feeling threatened by my independence or success. When I told him about David and Jessica's betrayal and how I had protected myself from their manipulation, Robert's response was admiration for my planning and strength, rather than concern about my ability to trust or be vulnerable in relationships. Today, I am 37 years old, financially secure, engaged to Robert, and running a nonprofit organization that provides education and support services to people dealing with gambling addiction in their families. The organization has helped hundreds of people recognize the warning signs of financial abuse and develop strategies for protecting themselves from manipulation by addicted family members. The work reminds me daily that betrayal and deception are often motivated by desperation rather than malice, but that understanding someone's motivations does not require you to enable their destructive behavior or sacrifice your own security to fund their addiction. David and Jessica had made choices that destroyed their families and criminal records, but they had also given me the opportunity to build something meaningful from their betrayal. Mom eventually recovered from the shock of learning about the inheritance and the family betrayals. Though our relationship required time and counseling to rebuild trust and communication, she admitted that she had always favored Jessica and had not paid enough attention to the warning signs of both David and Jessica's problems. With money and gambling, Emma and her new brother are now living with Mark in a stable, secure environment funded partly by the college accounts I established for their education. Mark has remarried a woman who is a positive influence on both children, and they seem to be thriving despite the trauma of their mother's criminal behavior and abandonment. Jessica was released from prison after serving 14 months of her sentence, but she has had minimal contact with her children or other family members. According to mutual acquaintances, she moved to another state and found work in retail, apparently trying to rebuild her life away from the consequences of her previous choices. David also moved away from Denver after his bankruptcy proceedings were completed. I have heard that he found work as a car salesman in Arizona and has been attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings, though his recovery process has been complicated by ongoing financial problems and the collapse of his professional reputation. Looking back, I realized that Aunt Eleanor's inheritance had saved me from years of continued deception and manipulation by people who viewed my resources as solutions to their own problems. If I had not had financial independence, I might have been unable to escape David's gambling addiction or protect myself from Jessica's criminal schemes. The money itself was not the most important gift Aunt Eleanor had given me. The real gift was the freedom to see my relationships clearly and make decisions based on what was healthy and sustainable rather than what was expected or demanded by family members who claimed to love me. Aunt Eleanor's letter had warned me that sudden wealth would reveal the true character of people around me, and she had been absolutely correct. David and Jessica had shown me exactly who they were when they believed I had something they wanted, and their betrayal had actually protected me from years of continued financial and emotional abuse. The most important lesson I learned was not about money or family relationships, but about the difference between guilt and responsibility. I felt guilty about David's gambling addiction and Jessica's criminal behavior, but I was not responsible for their choices or the consequences those choices created for their families. People make their own decisions about whether to gamble, steal, lie, or betray the people who trust them. My inheritance had not caused David and Jessica's problems. It had simply revealed problems that already existed, and given them opportunities to demonstrate their true character and values. Have you ever discovered that family members were deceiving you about money or addiction issues? How did you protect yourself when people you loved tried to manipulate you into funding their destructive behavior? What signs should people watch for when family relationships become focused on financial obligations, rather than genuine care and support? But there was one more chapter to this story that would test everything I had learned about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. 3 years after Jessica's release from prison, she contacted me through our mother with a request that would force me to confront the most difficult questions about redemption and second chances. Jessica had been working in retail for 2 years, living in a modest apartment in Phoenix, and attending both Gamblers Anonymous and therapy sessions to address the underlying issues that had led to her criminal behavior. According to Mom, Jessica had been sober from gambling for over 3 years and was trying to rebuild relationships with her children, though Mark remained cautious about allowing unsupervised visits. The request came through Mom because Jessica was facing a medical crisis that required expensive treatment not covered by her basic health insurance. She had been diagnosed with cervical cancer that required surgery and chemotherapy, with total costs estimated at over $80,000. Without treatment, her prognosis was poor, but with proper medical care, her chances of full recovery were excellent. Mom called me on a Sunday evening, her voice heavy with the weight of asking me to help the sister who had betrayed me so completely. "Sarah, I know what Jessica did to you was unforgivable," she began carefully. "But she is still my daughter, and she is Emma and little Mark's mother. I am not asking you to forgive her or welcome her back into the family. I am just asking if you would consider helping her pay for medical treatment that could save her life." I listened as Mom explained Jessica's situation, her efforts at rehabilitation, and the genuine remorse she had expressed about the damage her actions had caused to our family. Mom also shared that Jessica had been sending money to Mark every month to help with the children's expenses, even though she was not legally required to do so and could barely afford the payments on her retail salary. The conversation with Mom forced me to examine my own values and priorities in ways I had not expected. I had built my new life around the principles of helping people recover from addiction and family betrayal, but I had never considered whether those principles should extend to the person who had hurt me most deeply. I told Mom I would think about her request and discuss it with Robert, who had become my most trusted advisor about difficult family decisions. Robert's perspective was characteristically thoughtful and balanced. He reminded me that helping Jessica medically would not require restoring our relationship or trusting her with financial access beyond the specific medical needs. Robert also pointed out that refusing to help could create long-term guilt and regret that might be more damaging to my emotional well-being than the financial cost of Jessica's treatment. He encouraged me to consider what decision I would be most comfortable with 5 or 10 years in the future, when the immediate pain of her betrayal had faded further. After a week of consideration, I decided to pay for Jessica's medical treatment through a trust account that would send payments directly to her healthcare providers. Jessica would receive the medical care she needed, but she would have no access to cash or control over how the money was spent. I also established that this assistance was a one-time gesture that did not signal forgiveness or restoration of our relationship. Jessica's response to learning about my decision came through Mom, since I was not yet ready for direct communication. She was reportedly overwhelmed with gratitude and had asked Mom to convey that she understood this help did not mean I had forgiven her, but that she was grateful for the chance to survive and continue working to become the person her children deserved to have as their mother. The medical treatment was successful, and Jessica's cancer went into full remission after 6 months of chemotherapy and radiation. According to updates from Mom, Jessica had used her recovery period to complete a business management degree through online courses, with the goal of eventually opening her own small business, rather than remaining dependent on retail employment. 2 years after Jessica's cancer treatment, she sent me a letter through Mom, the first direct communication we had exchanged since the confrontation at the restaurant. The letter was not a request for money or reconciliation, but rather an acknowledgement of the harm she had caused, and an update on her efforts to rebuild her life in ways that honored the second chance I had helped provide. Jessica wrote that she understood I might never be able to forgive her betrayal, and that she was not asking for restoration of our relationship. She simply wanted me to know that she was using her survival as an opportunity to become a better person, mother, and member of society. Jessica had opened a small bookkeeping business that specialized in helping people with gambling addictions manage their finances, turning her experience with financial deception into a tool for helping others. The letter also included photos of Emma and little Mark, who were now 10 and 4 years old respectively. Emma was excelling in school and involved in theater and soccer, while little Mark was a happy, energetic preschooler who showed no signs of being affected by the early trauma in his family. Jessica wrote that both children knew she had made serious mistakes that hurt their family, but that they were also learning about redemption, second chances, and the importance of taking responsibility for your actions. Reading Jessica's letter, I felt something I had not expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a sense of closure that had been missing from my recovery process. Jessica was not asking for anything from me, not money, not reconciliation, not even a response to her letter. She was simply sharing that she had used the gift of continued life to become someone worthy of the help she had received. I decided to respond with a brief note, acknowledging her letter and expressing hope that she would continue making positive choices for herself and her children. I also included updated photos from the college funds I had established for Emma and little Mark, showing that their educational security continued to grow regardless of the complications in our family relationships. My response seemed to provide Jessica with the closure she needed as well. We did not resume regular contact or rebuild our sisterly relationship, but we established a pattern of annual updates through Mom that allowed us to stay informed about each other's well-being, without the emotional complexity of direct involvement. David's story had a different trajectory than Jessica's. His gambling addiction proved more resistant to treatment, and his financial problems continued to mount even after he moved to Arizona. David had tried several rehabilitation programs and support groups, but his pattern of lying and manipulation made it difficult for him to maintain the honest relationships that recovery required. According to information I received through mutual friends, David had been arrested twice for writing bad checks and had filed for bankruptcy a second time after accumulating new gambling debts. His employment history was unstable, with several jobs ending due to attendance problems or suspicions about missing money from cash registers or client accounts. David had also attempted to contact me several times over the years, always when he was facing some new financial crisis that he claimed could be resolved with a loan or temporary assistance. His messages alternated between apologies for his past behavior and angry accusations that I was being vindictive by refusing to help him restart his life. I never responded to David's contact attempts, having learned from my experience with Jessica that helping someone is only meaningful when they are genuinely committed to change, rather than simply looking for temporary relief from the consequences of their choices. David's continued pattern of deception and manipulation indicated that he had not developed the self-awareness or accountability that real recovery required. The contrast between Jessica's and David's approaches to their problems taught me important lessons about the difference between genuine remorse and manipulative behavior. Jessica had accepted responsibility for her actions, worked consistently to address her underlying issues, and built a new life based on helping others rather than exploiting them. David continued to blame external circumstances for his problems and sought quick fixes rather than the difficult long-term work that recovery demanded. These experiences also deepened my understanding of the complex relationship between financial resources, and family loyalty. My inheritance had given me the power to help or refuse to help family members in crisis, but it had also forced me to develop wisdom about when assistance would be beneficial and when it would simply enable continued destructive behavior. Through my nonprofit work, I had met many families struggling with similar decisions about how to respond when addiction, mental illness, or poor judgment created ongoing crises for people they loved. The common thread in successful interventions was usually the combination of firm boundaries with genuine support for positive change, rather than either complete abandonment or unlimited financial assistance. My marriage to Robert had provided me with a partnership model that demonstrated how financial resources could enhance rather than complicate genuine love and respect. Robert and I maintained separate investment accounts while sharing household expenses and major financial decisions, allowing us both to feel secure and independent while building a life together. We had also established a charitable giving strategy that focused on organizations addressing gambling addiction, financial literacy, and family counseling services. Our shared commitment to helping other people navigate similar challenges had strengthened our relationship while creating meaning and purpose beyond our personal happiness. 5 years after David left me for Jessica, I had become someone I could not have imagined during the difficult period when I was discovering their betrayal and planning my response. The woman who had been afraid to confront her husband about his gambling had evolved into someone who could make complex decisions about family relationships, business investments, and charitable giving with confidence and wisdom. The inheritance from Aunt Eleanor had provided much more than financial security. It had given me the freedom to discover who I was when I was not motivated by fear, desperation, or the need to please people who did not have my best interests at heart. The money had revealed that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than I had ever realized during the years, when I was focused on keeping David happy and maintaining family harmony. But perhaps the most important thing I learned was that forgiveness and reconciliation are separate processes that do not necessarily happen simultaneously or lead to the same outcomes. I had eventually forgiven Jessica for her betrayal, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because carrying anger and resentment was preventing me from building the kind of life I wanted to live. However, forgiving Jessica did not mean trusting her with access to my life or resources in ways that could create new opportunities for manipulation or exploitation. Forgiveness had freed me from the emotional burden of her betrayal, but wisdom prevented me from creating situations where similar betrayals could occur in the future. The nonprofit organization I had built with part of my inheritance had grown to serve over 1,500 families dealing with addiction and financial abuse issues. We provided education, counseling, legal assistance, and temporary financial support to help people escape destructive relationships and build sustainable independence. Every family we helped reminded me that the pain David and Jessica had caused me had also given me insights and motivations that allowed me to help other people facing similar challenges. Their betrayal had become the foundation for work that brought meaning and purpose to my life in ways that would not have been possible if our family relationships had remained superficially peaceful but fundamentally dishonest. The college funds I had established for Emma and little Mark had grown substantially over the years, providing them with educational opportunities that would not have been available if their family had remained trapped in the cycle of gambling addiction and financial deception that had characterized their early years. Both children were thriving academically and socially, with no apparent long-term damage from their mother's criminal behavior or their father's recovery process. Emma had developed into a thoughtful, responsible pre-teenager who understood that her family had faced serious challenges but had also learned important lessons about honesty, accountability, and second chances. Little Mark was a happy, well-adjusted child who showed no signs of the trauma that had surrounded his birth and early years. Mark had proved to be an excellent single father who had created stability and security for both children while allowing Jessica to maintain appropriate contact as she demonstrated consistent positive changes in her behavior and priorities. His new marriage had provided the children with a stepmother who was supportive and nurturing without trying to replace Jessica in their emotional lives. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that Aunt Eleanor's greatest gift had not been the money itself, but the wisdom to understand how financial resources could either enhance or destroy family relationships depending on how they were managed and protected. Her letter warning me about the impact of sudden wealth had proved remarkably prescient and had probably saved me from years of manipulation and exploitation. The inheritance had also taught me that true security came not from having money, but from having the wisdom and strength to make good decisions about how to use resources in ways that reflected your values and priorities. David and Jessica had viewed my wealth as a solution to their problems, but they had not understood that money without wisdom and character usually creates more problems than it solves. Today, when I speak to support groups and financial planning seminars about family relationships and money management, I always emphasize that the most important inheritance anyone can receive is not financial assets, but the knowledge and character necessary to handle resources responsibly and maintain healthy relationships with the people you love. Have you ever been in a situation where family members tried to manipulate you into solving their financial problems? How did you balance the desire to help people you love with the need to protect yourself from exploitation and manipulation? What signs should people watch for when family relationships become focused on money rather than genuine care and mutual support? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize warning signs or find the courage to set appropriate boundaries with family members who are struggling with addiction or financial irresponsibility. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family, betrayal, and finding strength when the people closest to you reveal their true character. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that you are not responsible for other people's poor choices, even when those people are family members who claim to love you. Thank you for listening, and remember that protecting yourself from manipulation and financial abuse is not selfish. It is necessary for your own survival and well-being.